Do the thing you fear, and the death of fear is certain.
Meet Jonathan DeCollibus, founder, father, husband, still a Californian farm boy deep down, who built 16 companies from the ground up, with plenty of crashes and burns early on before hitting big wins.
I always say business is basically math plus courage. That's it. If you have the math that makes sense for a transaction to be profitable, long-term, sustainable, great. And if you have the courage to go out there and actually ask the hard questions to yourself and to the market, and then act on the truth, there's nothing that can stop you.
He's also an investor in more than 30 companies and sitting on boards and pushing boundaries on top of industries.
Make better offers to better people more often. I think that's something I repeat to myself and to my team every single day.
So in today's episode, you learn actionable insights that will help you position your startup for success and ensuring that you're actually getting those investing money rather than throwing pitches out of the window.
The reason why that's stuck in the back of my head is that's the thing that I would tell to an entrepreneur who might be overthinking something.
John, you call yourself a California farm boy deep down. What about that upbringing still drives your decision today?
Well, California farm boys, we work hard, we find a way. We're not afraid of getting our hands dirty. So I think the way that I'd say that it drives my decisions today is for example, a good, perfect example. I don't have my microphone stand. I'm holding it. You do what you got to do. You have no shame about it. You got to make it happen. I don't know if it necessarily drives my decision-making process from a strategic standpoint, but at the very least, it's the engine that kind of powers what the decisions follow through, why they follow through, how they follow through. I think that's the core.
I love that. Adaptation is the name of the game, right? And resilience. And I love when entrepreneurs like yourself like always find a way. And I know that you built 16 companies from the ground up. And if you were to pick one venture that you learned the most out of it, either from one that you actually crash and burn.
I mean, listen, that's a great question. I mean, it's asking me to choose which failure is the worst for me. It's a hard choice because they're all pretty bad. I'm trying to rank it in my head. I would say there was a carpet cleaning company I had. I was very young. I had just gotten out of a few other businesses that, had also failed. And I thought, okay, great. Let's make a total pivot, and bought a van, bought all the equipment, bought all that stuff, and started knocking on doors. And ultimately what that taught me was sales, and how to deal with rejection, how to be resilient in the face of hearing the word no over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And also it teaches you how to deal with all types of people, and how to deal with problems, and how to deal with, I think, door-to-door sales, which is, I don't think it's something I'm known for today, but it's something that has definitely shaped how I run my businesses. Is door-to-door sales is I think that's the most aggressive way to learn sales. It's the fastest feedback. It's the fastest way to fail, but also to immediately show yourself that there's another opportunity literally right next door, right? So you're able to you can fall pretty hard, but then you can just literally pick yourself up and go right next door. And so it teaches you state management. And so I think there's a lot behind that. Business was not by any stretch successful company. But the seeds of success grew out of the lessons that I learned out of that company.
I bet. And this reminds me of my early career life when I started similar way, like door-to-door sales, but for a company, not for myself. And just by hearing those no's, and even by people say, no way, I haven't talked to you on the phone. You are too young for the person that I hear on the phone. And I was, oh, no, it's me. And they're like shutting the door in your face. And I guess this generation that are standing behind a Zoom call, it's hard for them to understand. What do you tell them to overcome that rejection by actually leveraging both technology but the old school approach of getting your hands dirty?
I mean, I could be wrong, but I believe the fastest way to learn is with experience. And if you want to change a belief about the world, about yourself, the fastest way is by immersing yourself into an experience that will prove it to be true. I think evidence and proof, you stack that with yourself. I think what I would tell people who are maybe stuck in the headspace of, I'm afraid of rejection, or I'm afraid of what they're going to say, I'm afraid of this, afraid of that. Great. Run into the roar, dominate your fear, do the thing you fear, and the death of fear is certain. Right. So I think that's a big, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a piece of advice. I just think it's a truth. And it's a decision. If somebody wants to make that decision, go for it. Take the risk and go out there, knock on doors. Actually, as a side point, I think that's one of the most effective ways actually to go out there and close big deals is not to hide behind the computer, but actually to get face to face, because nobody's doing it anymore. Very few companies are doing it today.
Indeed. And I think they're not just avoiding, in a way, progress, but in the same time, that can be a way to differentiate nowadays. As you mentioned, like few company are doing it. And if you just show up and shake a hand physically, not with an emoji or something, that's different. That's one way of differentiating yourself. Or I heard this story of a company that was like cold calling and people weren't picking up. They just deliver phones, physical phones to those companies. And they're like, you want to pick up this call when it rings. And there was more specific copy on the packaging and on the phone itself and so on. But that was how they stand out when everyone is doing the same thing, like using maybe even AI tools to cold outreach and all that stuff. And that's interesting. And I want to ask you, like, you went from builder to investing in more than 30 companies. How did you make that transition?
I don't know if it's a big transition. I think a lot of, just as a caveat, I think there's a really strange myth that people have where you think, well, once you hit a certain level of revenue, once you become a liquid millionaire, once you do all the, once any of these things happen, your life changes forever. And I think the only thing that I could say personally that has actually done that for me is actually having a kid, which I said I wasn't going to talk about, but here I am talking about it. But I think that is the only thing personally that I've actually seen that you actually can say, oh, life has actually changed at this point. But I think whether you're a builder or you're investing into a builder, I don't know that it's a real difficult transition. I think it's something that happens pretty naturally because I think as a byproduct of being a builder and making things happen and building businesses and networking and talking to people, these opportunities come up and you get to meet people, as you know, and sometimes there's a great business that comes up and there's a great founder and there's a great, I always say it's chemistry, liquidity, timing. So all three of those things match and it works and a check gets cut and all of a sudden you own shares and you show up to a couple of board meetings and you listen to how things go and you want to do more of that. I don't know. I think it's a transition, which is, I think it's very natural because I think at its core, being an entrepreneur is really your ability to make your capital work for you ultimately. And I think capital is one of the forms, one of the many forms of leverage that we have as entrepreneurs. And I think that whether you're investing in your marketing with your capital or you're investing in yourself, maybe you're taking a course. You know, I think we're all investors at a certain stage. I think the only difference is you begin to point that capital at someone else because that's a higher point of leverage.
And on that note, since indeed money is great to have when it comes to leveraging anything around you, yeah, I mentioned like investing in a startup or investing in people or investing in marketing or in yourself. What's your decision making process when you do that in order to see what makes sense, both as a priority or as a stage that you're at? Because often I feel like everyone is saying, oh, leverage is gold and you need to do it. But it's so much noise that everyone's saying, do this, invest in that, use your cash for that or that. What's your opinion on this?
If I understand your question, I think leverage is, I think I'll credit this to Naval Ravikant. I could be wrong, but I think it was him who said this, that your leverage is basically a magnifier of your judgment. So I think if you have bad heuristics, if you have bad frameworks of thinking in general, leverage is going to amplify the judgment that is not serving you. right? So I think as a caveat to everything there, I think leverage is great. Capital's invested, it's great. All of that's how wealth is built. I think ultimately is by properly leveraging systems and people and technology, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the key is you have to begin with clear thinking. And I also think you have to, when you're talking about investing and how do you know when to invest into a good company, I don't know that there's a real clear cut answer. Otherwise, I probably would be a trillionaire right now. And I've made my fair share of bad investments for sure. I mean, I've lost my hat on just in the last year and a half, 2 years. I can think of at least 3 companies I've invested in that were terrible to invest in. I don't think there's a clear cut answer to that, but I think it really ultimately comes down, for me personally, comes down to the founder, who's behind the engine, who's your driver, so to speak, of the F1 vehicle. I think before I even look at the vehicle, I want to look at the driver of that vehicle. And is there clear thinking? Is there ambition? Yes, but also is there tenacity and resilience? Because I think you've got to have the inner game as well as the outer game. You can't just have a great system behind you or a great idea of a business you want to scale and grow or whatever, but you've got to have the fortitude, because the road is not a smooth path. As right, it's not, whether you're a founder yourself or you're investing into a business, it doesn't matter. It's the same difference, right? You're bound to get hit with a lawsuit. You're bound to get hit with a down season, a down cycle. There's always going to be something. I don't think that there's any sort of perfect environment, laboratory environment where you can build a business in peace and harmony all the time. So I think with that in mind, I like to look at the founder. I think to see, I don't think you need to have an experienced founder. I think that is actually a big myth, because I think a lot of people say, "Hey, well, what's your track record?" I don't think that matters. I think what matters is what's on the inside, because if you can really get someone there, that's what was the company that Zuck started before Facebook. And again, people might say, "Well, you're cherry picking." Yeah, probably, but the point stands. You can stack the odds in your favor if you bring somebody to the table that you want to invest in, who is going to be creative, who is going to be tenacious, who's going to be resilient. That's just the truth. So for me, that's where I like to spend 80% of my time. And then the 20% of it, I like to spend that looking at the business model, looking at it's funny, this morning I was having a conversation about that with a gentleman who's pitching me and trying to get me to invest in what he was doing. And I told him at the end, he said, "What could I have done better?" Because he was trying, I turned him down, but he said, "What could I have done potentially better?" And I told him, I said, apart from a few things, I think at a stage where you're at personally, I think there's a problem that you see with all of these pitch decks that come out, where page 2 is the total available market, and it shows 1 out of every 2 people on planet Earth will buy my product, or potentially could. Tam, Sam, Bam, blah, all these words, right? And that doesn't actually connect with people who are entrepreneurs themselves. I think, in fact, it probably does the opposite, because a real entrepreneur will look at that and go, "Yeah, sure, but," and then there's the reality check period that comes.
So first, you invest in people, not in businesses, right? And second, when you look at how they present the business itself and what's behind the scenes and so on, you look for something specific with someone that it's having, let's say, a pitch or an approach that stand out based on something, or how you approach it.
I mean, ultimately, you're investing in something that can add the most amount of value to the market at the lowest cost of acquisition and delivery, right? So that's the business model that you want ultimately. The What I've seen that kind of breaks that is if you have any one of those where there's assumptions that are being made about any of those 3 points, the value that's being delivered to the marketplace, the cost of acquisition, the methods of acquisition, or the cost and methods of delivery, if there's bad assumptions behind any of those 3 things, you are bound to have some bumps in the road. That's where the creativity has to come into play, and the tenacity and the resilience and the sort of that persistence, because you have to be able to change the approach to a degree. But I think the risk that an entrepreneur will always take is that you have an idea that is valid here, but it must be valid there in the real world. So I think if someone is going to mention their TAM and their SAM and all that other stuff. I think what actually is worth 1,000 times more is if you're able to actually go into the real world and get people to pre-sign for it. It's not that hard to do. I mean, it really isn't.
Waiting lists are gold.
And look, it's not that they're going to actually follow through on that, but it shows an investor that that you have the wits about you to understand that proof of demand is actually something that matters. TAM means total available. Is it actually though value to that market? What does that market absolutely define as value? Because if that's what they're going to be exchanging for their hard-earned cash for whatever value that this company is proposing to deliver, there has to be some kind of for a transaction to happen, both parties have to win in a capitalistic society, right? So both parties, so the person who's selling, they have to believe that what they're giving up is of less value in a sense than what they're getting in return. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, and vice versa, right? So I think that's the for me. I like to stick to the fundamentals, and that's how I would probably answer your question.
And when it comes to fundamentals, there are specific principles that you make decision based on.
In terms of who to invest in or what?
Yeah, who to invest in, and as well, I'd love to know in running your business as well.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to our ability to take it's I think the fundamentals are those three. It's how creative can we be to add the most value to the marketplace? And I guess the way that I define that is part of it is I think you start with the baseline, which is a baseline promise, which is I will give you this in exchange for this amount of money. And then what I've always looked at that through the lens of is how would I need to how much value could I build into that promise that I could actually fulfill that would be stupid for someone on the flip side to see. There's no way that I'm going to say no to that as a buyer. And I say that as someone who's a ridiculous, I'm probably a great salesperson, but I'm an even better buyer. I love to buy things from great salespeople. It's impossible in many ways for me to say no to a very good salesperson. I was in Egypt about 10 years ago, and I'll never forget some of the best salespeople I've ever met in my life. And I'm sure you've witnessed them before, right? Where they come in, my friend, here's some tea. And then you sit down for a little cup of tea. You're like, it's hot outside. Why am I drinking tea? And then the next thing you know, hey, take a look at these rings that I made. Oh my God. And you look at the rings. Well, try one of them on. Hey, they put one on your wife. Oh, that looks amazing. Oh, doesn't that look beautiful? And they bring people over, right? And there's this whole, so where is the value? So I think the value there is you're looking at things that are intrinsic value. So in that case, that's actually the ring that you're buying or the ring that they're selling. But then there's all of the other sort of extrinsic points of value that is the experience. And I think that's something that you don't actually get to a point of delivering massive value until you master both. So I think that's always a question that I'm looking for, whether I'm sitting on a board meeting call with a company that I've invested in and we're talking about deliverables and how to improve them in the market, et cetera, or whether I'm looking internally at my own company and saying, how do we improve what we're doing here? It always comes down to analyzing what is the intrinsic and what's the extrinsic? What are both sides of the equation here? And how do we maximize both so that I think Tony Robbins said that before. How do you turn people into raving fans? There's that Taylor Swift lover or hater. Her fans are not just, I like Taylor Swift. They will spend insane amounts of cash to get a box seat. There's a tremendous amount of buy-in. And I think the reason is, of course, business model plays into that, but I think it's ultimately comes down to what is the experience like? And then what is the actual value that they're getting off the back of that? And ultimately that comes down to, you have to understand the market. You've got to talk to people. Going back to your first question about hiding behind a Zoom call, sometimes you've just got to get out there in front of your market and talk to them and say, would you actually pay for this? What is it that you need more than this? I think all of the answers are out there. We just have to ask the right questions. And we have to have the courage to actually go out there and do that. I always say business is basically math plus courage. That's it. If you have the math that makes sense for a transaction to be profitable, long-term, sustainable, great. And if you have the courage to go out there and actually ask the hard questions to yourself and to the market, and then act on the truth, there's nothing that can stop you.
Absolutely, because then you can build that experience. And part of that experience are ultimately emotions that people go through. And when they understand exactly what you're building, or the problem that you're solving, and so on. And if you can paint that picture of someone experiencing your product or whatever you're building, then the chances for them to show interest are much more higher. And I love your take on like actually validating, get some sort of interest out of people rather than just putting some random numbers that you did quote unquote research on, which might not be true. But if you have a list of, I don't know, even 100 individuals that put their email or their name there just to find out more when you launch, even a small percentage of those share more details, you already get some valid data, even price points and so on, that you can leverage further. And on that note of leverage, what's one repeatable system that you use in all your businesses along the years?
Make better offers to better people more often. I think that's something I repeat to myself and to my team every single day. That's how we're going to grow. That's how we're going to dominate. Is we have to structure better promises, better offers, and present those to better people, better quality companies, better decision makers, et cetera, and do that more often. And it's not the thing I like about that is also the thing I hate about it, which is it's not a quantifiable phrase. But that's also why I like it, because it rings true when you're at the startup stage. It rings true when you're at the SME stage. It rings true when you're at the larger. So it's something where I think that is if you look at a Chase Bank, they are constantly, or any large bank out there, they're constantly putting out new cards. Why are they putting out a new credit card? It's the same thing. Well, they're putting in, okay, well, sign up here, spend this amount of money, and you get this huge bonus of points. Or you do this and this, and you get that. They're constantly innovating. The companies that don't innovate on their offer, they're going to get left behind by the guys who are.
Absolutely. And what are the components of an offer that it's hard to refuse?
That's a great question. I think it's a combination of two things. The first one is you have to put something on the line yourself. You have to have skin in the game yourself. The incentives must be aligned if you want there to be mutual respect. And I think that's important in all areas of leadership, especially sales and marketing. But I think in whether you're talking about leading a team or whether you're talking about leading a market, I think you have to go there first. And if you want them to put their money on the chopping block, then you should also put your risk on the table as well. Something I think we all, at some point, we know this is true, but the reality is that I'll give you a realistic example of that. Is if I go to you and I say, okay, I will take you to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And if I don't, or if something happens along the way that's my fault, I'll give you $10 million cash. Even if you don't want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, most likely you'd say, great, I'll take you up on that offer. Right. So I think there's the incentive alignment of that's where I see a lot of bad offers that can be very quickly fixed is there's an incentive misalignment. And by the way, I think this can go too far if taken to an extreme where it actually lowers the status of the company and actually can be a negative, right? Where it almost can be too, and I think that's where the maturity of the entrepreneur comes into play, that you do enough reps with your offer and you figure it out for yourself where that line's at. But I think the point is that if you're able to say, I'm asking you to risk this much, I'm also going to put my risk at that level or a little bit higher. One of the first guys that taught me that was Frank Kern back in the day. I think it was in Palm Springs where we were at this event together. And there was a napkin. He's writing on a napkin. He goes, IIO, Irresistible Intrigue Offer. And I said, well, what is that? He goes, easy. He goes, you just write the entire sales letter. And then at the end of it, you say, if you feel like I wasted your time, and it was a 15-minute call, if you feel like I wasted your time, we'll send you a check for $5,000. Now, again, this is math plus courage again. So I think you've got to have the emotional fortitude, but the math needs to make sense. You can't just say that if that's not feasible at scale, et cetera. So I think there's both pieces that I got to be in play there. But I think that's the first point for me is the incentive alignment must be there. And I'm talking about what I like to do to create the very best offers that I humanly can. That's the first point. I think the second point is that there needs to be real value that the market actually wants phrased in a way that they actually phrase it. And I say that because I think there's a pandemic, an epidemic maybe, depending on where you go, of offers that are out there that are so technically complex that you look at it and you go, okay, this makes no sense to anybody, even the person who's selling it to you, right? I think there's a fine line between showing and demonstrating competency and also on the flip side, maybe using terms that are so niche. I think one of the ways I've grown a lot of the companies I've been involved in has been with cold calls and cold email. Part of what that teaches you is you've got to talk at a first grade level. Like you cannot use complex anything. If you start an email and you start using, interesting long words that make sense to you and your three friends who are in your industry, then you send it out to a total stranger. They see it. I mean, this happens to you, happens to me all the time. We see it. What do? We turn it off. We go, well, I'm not going to,
Reply to that.
I don't have the time to digest all that. I'm running, I'm doing something, I'm driving, whatever. I'm checking my email as I'm driving, which is totally illegal. What is this? Oh no, I can't read that. But if it's written in like all the words are tiny and there's, you know, anyway, I think it's a combination of those two things. I think there needs to be incentive alignment. I think that's number one. Number two, the value has to be what the market wants and also even better phrased in the way that they would phrase it.
And what's your approach to identify what exactly a market wants? We briefly touched before, like trying to validate through building a waiting list to like score cards and so on. But do you have a specific approach when you do that, especially for a startup, for example?
I think it depends on the company, but I think ultimately the mechanism's the same, which is, and by the way, I think this is completely different than there's a word for this, where you get a group of people in a circle and you ask them questions, a polling or some kind of, hey, like a little bit of a market research. The way that I say to do it is use whatever mechanism you're going to be using in the real world and show that mechanism of delivery, the offer delivery to your market and see how they respond as if they're actually buying it. That's the ultimate because what that allows you to do is it allows you to go out there and potentially have bullets shot at you, but it doesn't hit you.
That's interesting. And to stay a bit more here on the topic of building things and validating things and so on, what have you observed in terms of beliefs that most builder hold that you believe is wrong and why?
I think it is perfectionism, which is actually fear. And I think it's okay to be fearful, but I think don't let that dominate. And I think that's where I think perfectionism is. Some of the best pitch decks I've ever seen were poorly written on a Google Doc with a lot of misspellings and a lot of images that just were taken off their phone, slapped into there, but the message got across and they were confident in what they were saying. And I think the over perfectionism, the over polishing of everything needs to be perfect all the time, constantly. I think it's a circle back to your very first question about being a farm boy and just being dirty and you got to get it done. I think that is the biggest. I would say there's two things. I think that is the number one negative belief is it has to be perfect or they will not buy. That's absolutely not true. And I'm living proof of that because every single quarter, the value that my company provides the market elevates so much that what I was offering 10 years ago is completely in a different ecosystem, a different planetary system than where we're at today. But people were buying back then. I think the perfectionism is it's got to be perfect. It's that if then statement. If it is perfect, they will buy. Not true.
And if someone is struggling with this, how they should approach? What's your recommendation to approach it? Assume they are like literally overwhelmed by trying to build a perfect tool or trying to build a perfect pitch deck, whatever they are trying to build. And they're just wasting not days, but weeks to create that perfect thing. There is a step by step approach that you'll go through in order to fix, quote unquote, that perfectionism.
There's opportunity everywhere, right? So I think even when you look at the perfectionist belief system, or frankly, any other fear, any fear that you have that's, I've got to have this just right. I've got to have this just finely tuned, just perfectly enough. I think there's one of two things that's happening. Either you believe the market is super tiny and you can't go back and talk to people over and over and over and over and over again, or you're overextending yourself massively and you're probably taking a risk you shouldn't be taking, right? Like if you cannot afford to lose, it can work for you, I think. But I'm thinking just through an example of somebody who's maybe over leveraged on a trade because they're trying to make or break the entire future of their life on that one trade. It might work out, but it's not a sustainable path, right? So I think perfectionism really ultimately is, it's really that anti-fragile idea. As long as you can learn, or you've got a good story at the end, or you can improve at the end. I think Brian Tracy has these two great questions. What did I do right? And what would I do different next time? And the reason why that's stuck in the back of my head is because I would ask myself that every single door I would knock on. Every single door. What did I do right? What would I do different next time? And when I would transition to do phone sales, same thing. And so I feel like that's how you get the experience of it, is just to fail as fast as you can, collect as many no's as you can. You'll be fine. It'll make you dangerous, actually. It'll make you dangerous because it's going to turn you into somebody who is just unstoppable. Because at that point, the people who are the most formidable opponents are the ones who have been through hell and back and have survived. They've got the battle scars, and they know that it's not as scary as everybody says. That's the thing that I would tell to an entrepreneur who might be overthinking something or trying to overprotect yourself and all of these things. I call it perfectionism, but it's all the same thing. That's my answer to, that's my very short to a very precise question from you.
Yeah, and I love your answer because indeed it's not like black and white thing, right? It's the nuances are more complex and often are tied to the same thing. And when you overcome fear, it's so much easier because you have that mentality of with or without me. I think Daniel Priestley said that if I get a no, like business is going great, I don't live to get that yes every single time because that's not realistic. And if you get yeses all the time and you have like over 50% close rate, then probably you're charging too little. So yeah, and I want to talk a bit about lifestyle in general, because I feel like when we are entrepreneurs, we grind, we work a lot, we spend a lot of time doing this thing that we truly love, but in the same time you have other identity, like you're a father, you're a husband, you're that Californian farm boy. Like how you protect that, how you protect your roots without overworking yourself, especially operating at the high scale that you operate at.
I think you have to integrate it all together, I think is the idea. If you are living by priority, if you're living by in accordance with your highest values, I actually, this might be something a lot of people would disagree with me on. This might be considered a controversial, it might be something like that, but I actually don't believe in burnout. I don't believe in work-life balance in the typical sense, because my perspective on that is, well, let me tell you first what I do agree with. I agree that if you are living with others' highest priorities and others' highest values directing your activity most of the time, I actually do believe that will cause burnout. I do believe burnout is real. I just don't think burnout happens when you're living by priority, when you're obsessed with your highest values and your highest goals. So I think the answer for me of how do you not get lost, I think, is actually to reverse that. And how do you find what your highest values are? How do you find that thing that will energize you when you're working until 2 a.m? And weirdly enough, I'm going through a season right now where last night I was working until 2 a.m., got up pretty early, spent time with the family, got after it, worked, took a bit of a break with the family and got back into it. Because for me, it's the way that I see things is my purpose. And this is it's a very personal point for me is my highest values are to provide for my family. Number two is to protect my family. And number three is to be present with my family. So if all three of those things are being met, I'm winning. And I'm and even if it's not being met exactly, but I'm improving how I'm achieving that, small things like, how can I become even more present? How can I take a 1 minute interaction with your wife, with your kids, with whoever it is that you're with? How can you take that 1 minute and inject as much presence into that 1 minute to where that feels for them like the most magical moment that they've had with you all day long? Because I think that's where the purpose that I think that will allow you to fully integrate. I think that there's a belief that you can't be a California farm boy and be a father and be a husband and be an entrepreneur and be an investor and be this and not be a that, be a musician. I also love chess and all these. So there's all these things, but if you can somehow connect it all to your highest values, that's how you integrate. I think that's been my experience, and that's been the experience of people that I've seen who've really plugged into that. And I think that's where the greatest integration comes in, where you have the full alignment, where you can punch through the wall, right? You have that full alignment. There's not one part of you that doubts what you're doing, why you're doing it, because everything's aligned. Your beliefs, your actions, your behaviors, your physiology, this everything's connected in with that highest set of values. So that would be my take. Probably a lot of people might disagree with that, and that's completely fine. But that's my take.
I'm not one of them, since I know the importance of aligning the values with your actions and especially the beliefs. Like, because it's one thing to quote unquote say something, it's another thing to truly believe it, and obviously, it's another thing to put into action. And sometimes, speaking of being present, sometimes can be as easy as just turning off your notifications or putting your phone away
Yeah. Oh yeah.
or like turning off your laptop or like going outside and be in nature. For example, like for the past 7 days, my brother and his wife was visiting, and I was like spending a lot of time outside
Mhm.
without my phone. And like that simple act, without looking all the time at, oh, I got another email or I got another message. That simple act of putting my phone away changed the experience that I had with them. And I know it's hard because I struggle as well sometimes with this. And this is another thing that I want to ask you. There are still some misalignment between maybe your business operations and your life that you want to improve.
I don't have a sort of an ideal there, as long as I'm moving towards and making progress towards those highest values. I mean, life is seasons. I mean, you've got winter where, you know, there's a lot of snow. Some places of the world it gets cold, and what's ideal during the winter, during the winter is not what's ideal during the fall, during the summer, during the spring. So I think as long as you're aware that life is seasons, and there are going to be seasons in which you've either got to ski or you've got to get down that mountain or you've got to do something, or there's seasons in which it's so. The way that I see it is that it's a seasonal. I don't see everything as it's always going to be like this forever, because that's actually, I think, one of the most consistent things about life is that life is constantly changing. And so I don't believe that I have some type of ideal, schedule or morning routine. I used to be very rigid in that sort of belief system. Now it's really, okay, great. As long as I'm achieving what I need to achieve and I'm making the progress towards these highest goals. And by the way, I do like to stack the odds in my favor, in the sense of, I like to, instead of say, well, I'm going to close this amount of cash, or I'm going to maybe flip it around and say, how many no's can I collect? Make it a game for you to win, instead of making it the opposite, in a sense. How many times during a presentation can you say a particular word? Even if you just have a game that you play with yourself to keep yourself engaged with something or to make something interesting, right? I think those are the points that I think you can inject a lot of fun and a lot of interest to keep yourself engaged on some things during that might not be super interesting. But ultimately, I don't know. I think when I go back to my daily routine a year ago, probably not. But a year ago, I was happy with where it was. I think it's just this constant evolution. And I think a year from today, will I look back where I'm at today and say, that's perfect? That's exactly where I want to be at? Probably not. But right now, this is exactly where I want to be. Right. So I think there's that flexibility that you have to have. I think that if you're too rigid, you'll snap. But if you're flexible, there's a lot of power and strength that is within the ability to be flexible. That's the way I would answer that.
Love that. And this kind of leads me to something that, at least myself, I often ask in this alone time or when I simply think through things. And because happened before into my life and my business, and I know that a lot of people, like, it's just how life is. Like, if you just lose everything, how you rebuild in just 3 months? What will be the first things that you'll do, business wise, obviously?
I mean, that's a great question. I love that. I love that because I think everyone has a superpower. I think that's the one thing that I think it's always important to know what your superpower is. What are the skills that you can rely on? It's part of what makes someone a wartime leader. A natural wartime leader is your ability to know what the answer is to that question for yourself. Because I think it gives you the ability to take a risk and know that, okay, if this goes sour, even worst case scenario, I could be back. So I think my personal answer to that would be I would find people and I would connect people with, for example, I would find people who need to be connected and I would make deals happen between two different parties. Whether that's a specific kind of sale or whether that is making relationships happen that are extremely profitable. That is something that you can do with a phone or even not a phone, as long as you got 2 feet and you got a good smile and you can ask good questions, you can make things happen. That's what I would do. I think it would be a combination of identifying one, maybe a buy side and a sell side, finding where that might be. So depending on where you drop me off, if I'm in Zurich like I am right now, it might be in the finance space. If you drop me off in, I don't know, Phoenix, Arizona, it might be different. My answer might be different. But maybe there I'd be looking for people who are in the solar panel space. I don't know. But I think it just depends. I think it depends. But I think to get to what I think you're actually asking is not necessarily what's the actual tactic. I think what you're actually asking, if I'm understanding you, is where's that confidence coming from? How do you know that you'd be able to make it out? And I think part of it that I can say this pretty confidently is that I've done that a few times. It's not so much a hypothetical for me. It's actually things that I've been there where I'm like, okay, cool. Go ahead. Well, that really went bad. I lost my you know what. That is something that I think if you're in the game long enough, if you're in the boxing ring long enough, you will get hit, and that's okay. But as long as you know that you can be tenacious and resilient, then great. Get back up and change your approach. By the way, if I can turn the mic back at you, I'd love to hear what is your answer to that question, or do you have an answer to that question that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yes, of course. It's in a way similar to your answer, because I truly believe as well that if you're playing the game long enough, you kind of inevitably end up in a position that you lost something in terms
Mm,
business wise. And either it's, I don't know, a business, or it's a business partner, or it's a client, whatever. And every single loss make you more resilient. And based on that, you increase your resistance, you increase your experience as well, and you know how to deal with those stuff next. And for someone that started building websites for myself and monetizing them through display ads and so on, and literally Google killed my traffic overnight. I went from 5-figure months to like basically don't having any money in my bank account because I was just investing to quote unquote investing an apartment. And I knew how to get out because I had the skills that I built. And basically, I always refer to that. Like you said, like, what are the skills and what are my superpowers that I hone through that experience? Because every single thing that we do, it builds something inside us. Like we get better at sales, we get better at building, we get better at pitching, we get better at communicating, and so on. And I was just stay curious all the time. Like I think curiosity together with adaptation and people, like the network that you're surrounding yourself with, if you do these three things right, it's so hard to not kick back again very fast, like probably even quicker than 3 months.
mhm. Yeah, I'd agree. And I think it's like, to your point, that's where I think that's you've got your natural inclinations and then you have hard skills. That I think that's a big motivator is continuous get rusty. That's where I love to stay in the trenches. I love to get in the trenches. I don't care where I'm at in my life. That's a massive motivator for me is never become dull. Don't get rusty. Don't don't lay back on your laurels and go, oh, it's always going to be easy. It's not. And if it is, great. But you'd rather be a warrior in a garden like that than a gardener at war. You have to stay sharp. And so I love that. And I think that's what gives your deep level confidence. And I think that's a confidence I see in your eyes as well, is that great, bring it on. Bring it on. I mean, okay, fine. Let's say I make a bad decision. It happens, lapse in judgment, whatever, outside events, great. I'll make it back.
That's the spirit of the entrepreneur, right? When you have that approach and that mindset, it's almost impossible to fail in the maybe traditional sense of the word, because obviously as an entrepreneur you'll quote unquote fail, it will happen, but you'll bounce back and so on. And I know basically almost no one that once they become an entrepreneur they went back to a full-time job, or they quit everything altogether. Most of them, they find something else, they reinvent themselves. And
Mhm.
we live in that world in which if we don't reinvent ourselves, if we don't adapt, it's almost impossible to succeed. But if you do that, it's easy, quote unquote easy.
It's going to be hard either way, right? I mean, it's going to be hard to be a failure, hard to be a success. Then what's that saying? It says, pick your hard, choose your hard. If it's going to be difficult one way or the other, then,
Absolutely. And Jonathan, I want to end up with few quick fire questions
okay, let's go.
that I prepare for you.
Let's go.
What's one type of business deal you no longer do because it doesn't fit your values or strategy?
I don't know that I've done a deal that I would no longer do today, but I think I would probably answer it this way: a deal that doesn't have the ability to continue to give value after years and years. I like to get into deals that they have lasting impact. I always say sustainability to outcome. So speed to outcome and sustainability of outcome. So how fast you get there, yes, but how long does that outcome last? So I think there was a coaching company that I invested in, and I think that probably actually would be one that I wouldn't do again in that particular case, because they were providing great results, but their methodology, their framework was not long lasting. And it didn't have that lasting impact because they didn't build in frameworks and systems that would build the long term muscle, the muscle memory to be able to say, great, you now have this new system, this new operating system, so to speak. And that new operating system is now sort of a long-term framework. So I think it's a hard question to answer, actually. So I do like that one. And I'll be waiting to hear what other people answer to this question as well. But I think that's the way that I would answer that is things that do not have a lasting impact.
Nice. And what's one belief about business you held 5 years ago that you no longer hold?
Hmm. I feel like the evolution is always happening. There's probably beliefs that I've had less than 5 years ago that have completely been obliterated. But I think one of them is um, build it good enough and people will come. And I think that's actually, there are people today who probably are sitting on the cure to cancer in their laboratory, but they're sucking at the marketing and branding and getting the word out and raising capital. And I think ideas are not as valuable as your ability to deliver on the everybody's got ideas, especially now with AI. Maybe not great ideas, but people have got ideas. So I think that would be a big one is it's okay if you have an idea, great. If you have an idea, but you don't deliver on it, you're not able to deliver it into the market, you're not able to brand and build positioning and build funnels and all that jazz, um, then that is a belief I'd say that has definitely changed.
Yeah, and that's so common, right? Like I see a lot of people that, oh, I have this great idea, but you need to sign this non-disclosure agreement before I share it with you. I'm like,
No.
all right.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me to the final question. What's one skill you practice weekly that keeps you sharp as a business owner and investor?
I call it 20 minutes of hell. I do it every day. So that's one of the things I do as soon as I get tired or as soon as I get, okay, I got another 4 hours ahead of me. I put my timer on for 20 minutes and I just focus exclusively on the hardest, most difficult thing I humanly can that I don't want to do. And I just get it done. I probably power versus force would disagree with me in terms of that approach, but it's a great way to build the muscle to just get things done.
Love it, especially since often we postpone some things that feel like a drain for us, or whatever the feeling that you had. And
Mm-hmm.
those are the things that we often procrastinate on. But when you have that specific time, you know that you'll kind of do the hard thing.
Mm-hmm.
I assume it's much more easier. I'll try that as well.
Enjoy.
Eh, eh,
Compliments.
thanks.
Compliments of the chef.
Jonathan, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. And for everyone tuning in, please check this guy out because he's up for great things. And all his links will be down below in the show notes and on the screen right now. Connect on LinkedIn, check his superior websites. And I just want to say this: people like you allow me to do this thing that I love. So I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join me today.
Amazing. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the amazing time, man. This has been very refreshing. You have a very unique approach. I think it's a privilege. So thank you.
Thank you.